Today I'm going to go over the best frames for Exterminate. On the right, you can see exactly how each frame fared of those that I thought would do the best. So we have 0 to a minute 30 is high speed frames, a minute 30 to 2 minutes are medium speed frames, and 2 minutes past are low speed frames. Alright, so for low level star chart, which is level 0 to 30 enemies, Titania is the best, like absolutely the best, outclasses everyone else, can get 50-second runs, requires very little skill, right? You can learn it in 1 to 2 runs. For Steel Path level content, right, specifically the Saryn, Hildryn is the easiest in a limited case scenario, right? So each of these frames I only gave 5 to 10 runs. Hildryn was the best in those 5 to 10 runs, right? So 88-second run, medium skill. You're just flying around, shooting nukes at people. Nezha, also good. Medium speed, 98 seconds, medium skill, right? What do you expect? Good movement, 40-meter AoE nuke. Wukong, medium speed, 106 seconds, medium skill, right? I was just doing dash cancels. I didn't do a single emote cancel. I didn't do a single molt cancel. So it should be very medium skill. And then Mirage was medium speed at 111 seconds with high skill. I was not high enough skill to perform a perfect run of Mirage within the 10 attempts that I gave her. 111 seconds was my best run of those 10. I imagine I could have got about a minute in 10 or a minute in 20 with the same build if given enough time, but I don't think it was super worth it for this video alone. Some honorable mentions are Gauss. He doesn't move quite fast enough, and he has major energy problems, especially in the Saryn. Even if you build for higher efficiency, or you slot an equilibrium with a Panzer, you just run into a lot of energy issues, and then you also have to build up red line. It's just not a super great time. Jade's not that bad, honestly. Jade is fine. The main issue is that you have to fly close to the ground and you have to shoot at the ground when you're going towards your enemies. So instead of Hildryn, who can like basically hit through Y levels, like she can shoot the bottom of a ceiling and hit everyone on the above floor, Jade cannot do that, right? Because the AoE is very tiny. I've not tried Jade Nuke, but I would imagine it would be significantly worse. And then Varuna. Varuna is actually really good when you're able to get a good run. I think I got around a 115 with Varuna within 5 attempts. The main issue is that sometimes the targets with the Prey of Dinar just are not in the direction that you need to go for your Exterminate, right? So it completely messes up your pathing. You need to go in the wrong direction a lot to kill that target a lot, and it's a major problem, right? So if you're lucky enough, Varuna can actually be really good. The main issue is those targets can be out of the way. So like I was saying, some disclaimers. I only gave these frames 5 to 10 attempts each, right? So these are not the fastest times in the world. They're pretty alright. They're not the worst, but they're not the greatest, especially since I don't have Saryn pathing memorized. But they were the best I could do in 5 to 10 runs, which I think is a reasonable metric, right? If you do not see your frame on here, that's perfectly fine, right? There are frames that can perform Exterminate still quick, right? Like, even casually, you can do an Exterminate in like 3 minutes with almost any frame, right? This is not an attempt to make you stop having fun or stop using your favorite frame. This is just me telling you which frames are best for Exterminate. So I'm going to go over which I would recommend depending on how you like to move and how you like to kill, right? Because this varies from person to person. So Mirage has very custom movement. It's just your normal movement, right? It's just your normal Warframe movement, your normal parkour, and it's a custom killing, right? It's just your normal weapons. Wukong has very fast, fluid movement, but his killing is clunky, right? He gets stuck on obstacles with the slam. Nezha has pretty clunky movement. You overshoot a lot of the time, but the nuking is very fast, and it's very large AoE, right? And then Hildryn has clunky movement in a different way, in that you can't go up and down very fast, but you can move vertically, or you can move horizontally very fast, and very accustomed killing, right? You're just shooting off nukes. So I'll show each of these really quickly. So Mirage, your movement is just normal, right? And your killing is just normal. You're just shooting guns or throwing glaives, right? Everyone should be used to all of those things, right? So Mirage should be very comfortable to most people. Nezha, the movement is probably not very comfortable, right? You're sliding a lot, you have low friction, so you overshoot a lot. But the killing is very fast, right? You just have to do 3 casts, and then everything in a large radius will immediately die, right? As far as Wukong goes, Wukong has very fast fluid movement, probably the fastest and most fluid in the entire game, right? Because you can move around in any of the 6 directions, right? At a very fast pace. But when you're killing, if there's an obstacle in the way, like this pipe, it won't get around it. So if there was an enemy right here, it wouldn't kill it, right? Or if I was over here, it wouldn't hit any of the enemies behind this wall, right? So the killing can be very clunky, and you also need to be able to animation cancel, whether that's with dashing or with molt, right? As far as Hildryn goes, Hildryn actually has very good horizontal movement, right? You can dash fairly quickly, right? It's not super slow. The main issue is that you need to operate or teleport for vertical changes, right? Or you can, wait it out, but that's extremely slow. So when you're changing Y levels, you need to operate or teleport, right? And that's fairly clunky in my opinion. But the killing is very custom, right? You're just shooting a weapon, right? This is a massive AoE nuke weapon, right? It'll kill everything in its radius. Even if I have every single enemy grouped and I just shoot at the middle, right? If I just shoot in the middle of this entire large 20 enemy crowd, right? It'll hit everything. That's how big the radius is, right? Even something like a Brahma has just a similar radius. So it's basically a spammable AoE weapon, which should be accustomed to most people, right? So once again, if you want a custom movement and a custom killing, I would recommend Mirage. If you want fast movement and you don't mind the clunky killing, I would recommend Wukong. If you don't mind clunky movement but you want nuking, I would recommend Nezha. And if you don't mind the clunky vertical movement and you like the custom killing, I would recommend Hildryn. Alright, now let's get into the builds. Alright, so Titania. For Titania, you want a few casting speed shards. You can do all 5 as casting speed, or you can do 2 as I did. Ideally, you want these Tau, but you won't be using Titania outside of level 0 to 30 missions. You can bring that up a little more if you go for a higher strength build, but I wouldn't recommend much past 30. You're going to want Sunder on either your 1 to 3, you just don't want it on your 4. And you're going to want Razor Wing Blitz for speed. You'll want Prime Flow or Flow for your energy. And then you want Preparation to fill your energy on spawn, right? You're using Titania in things like Capture, Rescue, Exterminate, so you should be able to finish the mission before you run out of energy. So on like level 30 enemies, all you need to do is stay in Razor Wing, and then once you're in it, you just use your Sunder, right? And as you use it, all your enemies will die. So you can just fly around and keep hitting your enemies over and over and over. And it's the fastest exterminate times for level 0 to 30. Alright, so this is me doing a Test Hub Titania run, sped up 2 times. Titania has very clunky but very fast movement. If you can get the hang of handling that much speed, then it will be the fastest in the game by far. So you just want to run 5 strength shards. My build is just a pretty normal Age of Scale build, right? Nothing super crazy. You don't have to run Combat Discipline solo. I run it so that in squads I don't run into the problem where Avenger isn't proccing, as it's kind of buggy in squads sometimes when you get hit. Balefire looks something like this. Once again, not super stuck to this build. You can change it however you want. As far as using Hildryn, you just go into your flight, you pop Pillage, you pop Nourish, and then everything will just die, right? I'm pretty sure the damage is bugged in Sim, and that it's significantly less, but in game, it's like it one-taps everything. Even in natural cells, even in EDA, it one-shots everything, right? And when you're running out of shields, you just pop Pillage again to get them back up. That's basically it for Hildryn. Super simple. Alright, so this is me doing the Saryn Exterminate mission with Hildryn at 2x speed. You'll see a lot of operator teleporting just because it's much faster than Hildryn's movement. And you'll see a lot of me shooting through walls and shooting through floors because of the massive AoE from Hildryn. Thunder is pretty interesting. So the reason that Nezha runs Sunder so well is because of his augment, right? The Divine Retribution augment. Besides the augment, you really want to maximize your range, right? You want to do that as much as possible. You want fairly low duration, not 13%, but ideally 33%. You want high efficiency, and your strength doesn't matter. If you want to slot vitality, you can. I don't personally find it worth it until beyond level 500, and by that point it's already hard to stay alive on Nezha, in my opinion. But the reason that it's so good is because it spreads the heat stacks. So if you just watch this one, right, I pop the spears and they all have 40 heat stacks, and then it multiplies it when they explode, right? So even though it caps at 10, it still gets up there extremely fast, right? Which is why vitality doesn't matter too much, because you're already getting enough stacks to max it. So if you just do 1, then you're gonna do pretty low damage. But if you do 2, then you'll do exponentially more damage, and it continues to raise, but it stops being exponential after the 3rd. So you don't really want to do more than 3, and so you don't need too much cast speed, but you still want to run 1 or 2 shards, and the rest you can just put into strength, right? This can easily one-shot like level 200. It can one-shot Netra cells, but the main issue with it is eximus units. So when you have eximus units on, what happens is it will strip their overguard for the most part if you can cast it fast enough, but it won't always kill them. And if it kills some but not the others, then it can be hard to kill the rest, right? Generally, it's not too big of a problem, especially if it's under level 500. But what I would recommend is to run a Cabral on Assassin, right? So just a very simple Assassin posture Cabral, right? So that it can take out the remaining Eximus units, right? Because if you get a single Eximus unit left, right, or you have just Eximus units, then it's not good, right? Because you don't have that same scaling, right? So it only removes half the overguard. It depends on enemy density, but it's enemy density within 30 to 40 meters, which is why in mission it's generally not a big deal at all, right? I would highly recommend it for captures and exterminates and such in Steel Path, since it's a 40-meter AoE nuke and he can move fairly fast. Alright, so this is me doing Nezha Sunder on the Saryn Exterminate at 2x speed. You'll see I overshoot the movement a lot and run into things a lot because that's just how playing Nezha is. But you'll also see very constant 40-meter AoE nukes, right? If you watch the minimap, very constantly, everything around me will just die, right? Alright, let's talk about Wukong. So, on Wukong, the general build, you just want to make sure you have prime flow for your purple shards. You want precision intensify for your molt. And then you want to run good efficiency because you're going to want to constantly use Cloud Walker and molt, right? I personally run combat discipline because damage can be bugged in squads, and I don't mind having it max so that I can use less forma. Um, as far as the operator, you're going to use Xeneric. Wellspring will make you able to spam your abilities pretty constantly. And as far as your shards, you'll want 5 Tau Purple. Um, I have them off him right now, but that's your ideal for damage, right? You can run a Magistar or an Arca-Titron. I personally run a Magistar. The build looks something like this. Just a slam spam build, right? This one is an 8 times build, where you 8 times spam. What it looks like in practice, the damage is bugged in sim, so it will not one-shot, but generally speaking, you'll be one-shotting them. All you have to do is slam and then dash cancel out, right? So what dash canceling looks like is after you slam, you're just going to dash, and then you jump and you repeat, right? This is good for when you want to chain from one enemy to the next. So if there was an enemy here and one over there, then you'll slam, and then after slamming, instead of canceling with molt and jumping over there, you can just directly dash out, right? So you can slam, dash out, and then slam again, right? If for some reason you miss an enemy or two, you can repeat in the same exact spot by molt canceling. What that means is after a normal slam, you can press your 4 and it'll animation cancel, right? So you can immediately repeat it. So you can slam and then molt and then jump and slam again. I'm not the greatest at it, but if you set up like a macro on your mouse, Warframe does allow those types of things, and that would be much faster than a human. Molt canceling generally won't be used in Exterminate because you don't have many high health enemies that you won't be one-shotting, but it can be useful in certain mission types. Your general movement is just using molt and then Cloud Walker to move around, and then slamming, and then if there's another enemy close, then dashing out. But it's fairly simple. Wukong's pretty great. His main downside is that when you're using him, Magistar has like an AoE that does not go through obstacles. So if I jump here, I won't hit anything because this wall's in the way, right? But I don't have to look at them. It'll still kill them even if I'm not looking, right? All I have to do is make sure there's no obstacles in the way. And if there are obstacles, I need to move, right? That's the main downside with Wukong. But for the most part, he's pretty great, pretty easy to use, right? Alright, this is me doing Saryn Exterminate at 2 times speed with Wukong. You'll see a lot of Cloud Walker slams, and you'll see a lot of dash cancel slams, but you'll see no molt cancel slams, right? I chose to use a Magistar over a Titron, just because I found that influence did not do much on this map, because enemies that were grouped so tightly that Magistar would clear them all anyway, and there weren't many very small elevation change, more like entire floors in elevation change. So Mirage. Mirage is by far the most complicated, but it also has the most options, right? So your Mirage, Helminth will depend a lot, but generally speaking, you're just stacking duration and strength, right? If you can run Zeneric, you do not need any efficiency or energize, right? So you would replace Streamline with something like Augur Secrets or low-level Transient Fortitude, right? Sadly, since I do not have Prime Sure-Footed, I'm running Unaru for the poise, right? So when you're running Unaru, you do need to have a little bit of efficiency, and sometimes you'll want Energize. If you're running Nourish, you don't need it. If you're running something like Energize Musicians, then you will want an Energize, right? If you have Prime Sure-Footed, you can entirely ignore that and replace Streamline and Nexus with things like Transient Fortitude at level 12, and Energy Nexus could be replaced with Enemy Radar or something, right? You'll want to run Energized Munitions in your 4th if you're running a low ammo weapon, right? So think like the Brahma, the Ogress, etc. Generally speaking, just a build like this, ideally you'd want to replace this with Prime Firestorm. I just don't have it. You can run Corrosive. You don't necessarily have to. It depends. Like if you have Pillage on your Mirage, then you wouldn't need to. You could run something else, right? My Riven is just pretty simple, but you don't have to use a Riven, right? You could use Serration instead. If you just slotted that out, it would be similar damage still. You can also use an Ogress, or you could even use a Kuva Gatling, I believe is what it called, the Arcwing gun deployer. As far as melee options go, I would only really ever recommend the Falcor or Exodia Contagion Zaw, right? So Falcor, you can run a bounce melee influence build, and it'll bounce between things, and it'll track onto your enemies, right? So it has aimbot. The alternative is to run a Zaw with Exodia Contagion, because Mirage does a double multiplicative with her Eclipse, right? My Zaw isn't built very well, but you'll see it can still very easily one-tap. Range does not affect the explosion radius of Exodia Contagion. It's always 8 meters, which is why I don't personally like to run it too much. But if you do run it, just know that it is fairly good, right? It will one-tap stuff. It's just the range is not the greatest, right? The great thing about Exodia Contagion is it will not knock you. So, like, if you throw it right next to you, you will not be knocked over. Whereas if you use a Glaive or a Brahma or an Ogress or anything like that, it will knock you over, which is why you'll need to run Unaru or have Prime Sure-Footed. As far as the Falcor goes, when you run the Falcor, you're going to want to run Molt or you'll want to run Nourish. I generally run Nourish, but you don't have to. You can run Molt instead for more speed. I just find it to be uncontrollable levels of speed. When you're running Falcor, it's the same exact setup, except you pop Nourish. So you do your 1, your 3, your 4, and then you just throw at the enemy, right? And it'll track everything down and kill it, right? So even if you don't throw it exactly at your target, even if I throw it a little bit to the left or something, it'll still hunt them down and kill everything, which is why I personally find the Falcor to be the best, right? If you want to use a Brahma or an Ogress, you'll want to run Energized Munitions just because of how they have ammo problems, right? When you do that, the main issue is it costs almost 80 energy to pop Energized Munitions each time. So the ammo doesn't end up being the issue when you have Energized Munitions. It's just that you run low on energy, right? Which is why you'll need to run Energize or something of the sort. Another thing is you can be knocked back by the Brahma, right? So you need to use Unaru so that you don't get knocked back, or Prime Sure-Footed, right? Generally speaking, I would say the Brahma is the best because it has a 10 meter AoE. I believe that can go up to 12 or 13 with Prime Sure-Footed. Not Prime Sure-Footed, Prime Firestorm. Ogress is also an option. It's just it fires faster, but it has a smaller AoE, and it does less damage, right? Which means you might not be able to get away with running Energized Munitions. That's about it for Mirage. Just know that the movement is very fast-paced, So, like if you're running a glaive, sometimes it won't come back to you in time, like if you keep moving, and that means sometimes you have to detonate. So like, if you keep moving, you might have to detonate early so that the glaive will come back to you sooner. Overall, Mirage is very high skill. It's not very beginner friendly, right? As far as shards, I run exactly 2 Tau yellows and then 1 normal yellow, just because that's the parkour velocity I can handle, especially because Mirage is passive, which makes rolls 50% faster. I wouldn't recommend too much parkour velocity on top of this, but if you want to, you absolutely can, right? I personally find it to be uncontrollable amounts of speed, but if you're able to manage it, and you can still run like the Falcor or a Brahma or an Ogress or even the Arc Gun deployer, you can still get some really great times. It's just Mirage is by far the hardest to handle, right? So a majority of your runs will end up being not so fast, but then you might be able to get the highest time if you gave her a stupid amount of runs. Alright, so this was my Mirage Saryn Exterminate run at 2 times speed. My weapon of choice was the Falcor with bounce, just because it cleared off the outliers so much. I tried with the Brahma, the Ogress, and the Falcor, giving each run 10 attempts, and this was my fastest of all 30 attempts, right? And the fastest of my 10 Falcor attempts. If I gave the Falcor like 100 attempts, I'm sure I could get this time down quite a bit, but I wouldn't want to spend 4 or 5 hours just doing this one mission for this one video, right? Mirage is probably the highest ceiling, just because it's just like normal gameplay, and you can optimize normal movement so much and optimize your movements so much. It just has the most room for growth, but I would say on average, Mirage is the slowest of the 4, right? If you're capable of getting almost perfect runs every time, like you have Saryn pathing memorized, you have the enemy spawns memorized, you could probably do great with all of these, but probably the best with Mirage, right? Alright, so final thoughts. Once again, this video is not to convince you to not play your favorite frame, it's just to inform you of the best frames to use for Exterminate that are the fastest. Overall, which to pick of the 4 depends on you, right? Like, it's mainly subjective. You might be able to get faster times with Mirage than I was able to get with Hildryn. You might be able to get faster times with Nezha than I was able to get with anyone else, right? It depends on how you play, and it also depends on how well you know pathing, how well you can move with the frame, right? Like, even with clunky movement like Nezha and Hildryn, if you are able to master that movement, you could get very, very high KPM and very, very fast Exterminate missions, right? It just depends on how you play and who you like to play. And that's it.